What's up guys, Jason here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Dragonknight healer. Dragonknight healer is still probably one of the worst healer specs in the game, relatively speaking of course, compared to the other classes. A couple of reasons for that. First one being that in terms of burst heal, Dragonknight, their burst heal is a little bit unreliable at times. It's also a little bit inconsistent basically. Plus, Dragonknight healers don't have a unique group synergy that they can provide to the group. Nightblade healers also suffer from this as well, but Nightblade healers do have a burst heal, a targetable burst heal that's actually pretty decent, and so Dragoknights, because they don't have that unique synergy and their burst heal is a little bit less reliant than Healthy Offering, kind of fall at the very bottom when it comes to overall classes when in terms of healing and PvE content. It's not to say that Dragonknight healers are not able to clear all content in the game. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult for you to find potentially a guild that will allow you to run as a Dragonknight healer on sort of harder DLC trials. It's still certainly possible to clear your stuff on a Dragonknight healer, but again, a little bit of that sort of stigma is still kind of in place here in the endgame PvE environment. So with all that being said, we will be going over everything you need to know to create this build yourself. So gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to kind of need in order to recreate this. We will be talking a lot about different skills and different sets that you're going to want to have on hand as a healer, because you are a support role, which means you'll need to have these different sets and different skills to adapt to the situation at hand, whether that's a different trial or a different strategy that your raid lead might want to do. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is one of many different possible gear setups, and we'll be going over all the different gear that you will want to have on hand as a healer. So starting off with Monster Helm, we have Symphony of Blades, which is probably one of the best support Monster Helm sets in the game right now. Basically grants magicka or stamina back to anybody who is under 50% of either magicka or stamina, depending on which resource is higher, which is very, very useful for overall sustain, which, as you guys know, is very important for DPS. So being able to provide that support is very, very powerful. Other Monster Helm sets that you're going to want to provide kind of fall into support roles as well, not very many selfish Monster Helm sets. Starting off with the top, going our way down, first one we want to talk about is going to be Rkugamz, which summons a dormant spider that heals for a certain amount of health and restores 500 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters of where it spawns every second for 8 seconds. This is fairly useful if you have a lot of stamina DPS. Basically, just returns some more resources to them. If you have pretty much all stamina DPS, then Rkugamz will return more resources than Symphony of Blades will on average. So at that point, you will want to swap over to Sentinel. That being said, if you're not running a lot of stamina DPS, if you're running a more magicka DPS heavy group, then Sentinel Rkugamz is not going to be quite as strong, in which case you're not going to want to use this set. Next, we have Bogdan the Night Flame, which is a pretty nice set here, one of the strongest healing Monster Helm sets in the game right now. When you heal a friendly target, you have a chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters for a certain amount of health every second. Now, there is a cooldown on this, a 10-second cooldown, so you're not going to be able to get 100% uptime like you could in the past, but it's still a very powerful heal, mainly because of the fact that it is an AoE heal. While Earthgore, another really kind of okay Monster Helm set, has more raw healing done on a single target, Bogdan does usually end up out healing it just because of that AoE potential, so a very powerful set here to hold on to. And then beyond that, those are really the only two really strong Monster Helm sets that I'd recommend picking up. There are a few instances where you might want to run other Monster Helm sets like Bloodspawn or Lord Warden, but those are really reserved for more speedrunning strategies and not really generic strategies that you would be running for vet trials. In terms of sets, our first set is going to be the Vestment of Olorime from the Cloud Rest Trials. So you need to have access to Somerset in order to grab this set here. I have the perfect version here, but you can go with the non-perfect version if you are not able to clear Veteran Cloud Rest +1 or higher. The difference is the lack of that max magicka bonus on the 5-piece set there. The other unique 5-piece set remains the same there. This is one of the only 2 sources of major courage in the game, the other source being from Spell Power Cure. Spell Power Cure does have quite a few downsides to it, so Olorime doesn't have those same weaknesses. There is still a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to learning how to utilize Olorime. However, it is far easier to use, and so it has largely replaced Spell Power Cure as the set of choice. There's really no good reason to really run Spell Power Cure anymore outside of not being able to get Olorime. You'll always have at least one healer in this set here, Olorime, in any sort of vet trial team. For our second set, we are running Infallible Aether, which comes from any of the 3 Fragmented trials here. This might seem like a DPS set, but the 5-piece is more suitable for healers than it is for DPS, mainly because heavy attack builds are significantly weaker than light attack builds when it comes to amount of DPS you're able to pull. Versus healers, where you do have a lot of global cooldowns due to the changes to how Orbs and Springs works, so you do have time to do a heavy attack fully charged with your Lightning Staff or partially charged with your Resto Staff. Both of them would apply that minor vulnerability. This is a very powerful debuff, and so you definitely want to have this set on hand. There are some instances where you will not need to use this set, for example if you have a Nightblade tank, but you will need to play that by ear. It depends really on your specific raid group. Then we have Restoration Staff as our front bar, and a Lightning Staff as our back bar. So before we go over other sets, I do want to point out the traits and enchants for all of our armor pieces and weapons. So in terms of armor pieces, I like to go Infused on my large and Divines on my small, Prismatics on my large pieces, and Max Magicka enchants on my small pieces. You can go with all the Vines if you'd like. It really depends on really what you want and where you think you're deficient. So I like Infused just to get a little bit more max health, a little bit more Max Magicka from my prismatic enchants, but you don't really have to run Infused. You can run Divines all the same. For jewelry, you have 2 options when it comes to jewelry traits. It's usually going to be either Arcane or Infused. So Arcane will give you the additional Max Magicka, give you stronger heals, more resources. Infused will give you stronger enchants. In terms of enchants, due to the fact that we don't have to spam orbs anymore, sustain has gotten a lot cleaner, a lot easier, so pretty much need to run just spell damage glyphs. There's really no reason at all to run magicka regen glyphs. If you do need to, then you can certainly run a regen glyph, but generally speaking, it's a lot easier to sustain in Scalebreaker because of the changes done to orbs. For traits and enchants on our restoration staff, few options when it comes to enchants. I have a weakening enchant here, but you could also go with something like a weapon damage enchant for more weapon spell damage for stronger heals, absorb magicka to help out your sustain, and so on. You can go for traits. I like to go with Empowered for the additional healing done. You can also go with Mirrenhone, which more or less does the same thing. It improves your overall spell damage, which also improves your overall DPS as well if you want to go that route. And then there's obviously Infused if you want stronger enchants, Defensive if you want more resistances. So you have a few options here. You go with Charge if you're running a shock damage glyph on the back bar to help improve the concussed chance of getting concussed while you're on your front bar staff. For Lightning Staff, pretty much going to be infused with either a Crusher enchant or a Shock enchant, depending on what enchant your tank might be running. So if your tank's running Crusher, replace this with a Shock damage enchant, and vice versa. Pretty much Infused is the only trait of choice here on the back bar because you do want to get that strongest enchant possible on the back bar here. Now in terms of other sets that you're going to want to run, starting off with the dungeon sets. Starting from top, working our way down. We have Sanctuary, which is not a very powerful set, but it does have some niche uses, so you do want to have this on hand. Increases the healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 other group members within 10 meters of you. So 2 big limitations here. The first one being the radius, which is only 10 meters, and the second one being the fact that overhealing is actually fairly easy to do in this game. Overhealing basically refers to healing for more than you need. So if somebody is missing 2,000 health, but you're healing for 4,000, you overhealed for 2,000 health. Very easy to do that in ESO, mainly because of the fact that damage is fairly easy to mitigate, plus healing strength is fairly high. So you don't really need any sort of additional healing recede bonuses, because that just ends up increasing the amount that you heal by, which is not really the point of a healer in ESO. You're really here more for group utility. That being said, there are a few fights where Sanctuary is going to be useful. Cloud Arrest to help combat against Baneful Mark and Execute, Lakesti's Hard Mode to kind of combat the debuff from the Ice Prisons if you're still progressing that, for example. So it is still a set I would recommend picking up, but not an essential set for a healer. Next we have Worm's Raiment, which decreases the cost of magic abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 group members within 28 meters of you. Really great with magic DPS. Obviously if you have stamina DPS, not going to be as strong, so don't bother running it if you have stamina and DPS. Next we have Jorvuld's Guidance, which increases the duration of major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. Note that this is duration, not strength of damage shields. So your Fragmented shield, for instance, does not get stronger, it only lasts for a longer period of time. Generally speaking, this is mainly used to improve the major force uptime from Warhorn and jumps it up from 9.5 to 13.3 seconds. So pretty decent improvement, which overall increases group DPS. Not as strong as other support sets in terms of raw DPS potential, but it does also increase things like the major mending that you receive, so you are able to heal for more a little bit longer. Then Zen's Redress is a set that has been seeing some use mainly in very high-end PvE content. So speedrunning guilds, etc. So this comes from their Marsalok. Your attacks apply the Touch of Zen debuff on enemies for 20 seconds. Enemies with this debuff take an additional 1% more damage for each single target damage over time effect you've placed on them, up to 5%. So it does need to be single target damage over time, so things like Burning Embers, Engulfing Flames, Destructive Reach, they all count. But abilities like Blockade, Eruption, they don't count at all. So just keep that in mind. If you decide to run Zen's Redress, you will need to figure out how many, you need to get at least 5 single target dots on in order to really make use of Zens. Next, in terms of overland sets, there's not that many overland sets. There's just one overland set that I would recommend taking a look at. That's going to be Way of Martial Knowledge. So while your stamina is below 50%, your light attacks cause the enemy to take 8% additional damage for 5 seconds. This can occur every 80 seconds, giving you an effective 5% additional damage taken if you're able to maintain 100% uptime on this. Now the proc condition is going to be a little bit challenging to get, so you have to maintain your stamina below 50%, which is still doable as a DK, and you do have a little bit of flexibility here because you can restore some stamina if you need to, running basically using Cinderstorm to get some stamina back. But you might want to run this. It really depends on whether the tank is running this or you're running this, or if it's better off on like a template healer. So just keep this in the back of your mind. You definitely want to hold on to Martial Knowledge here as a healer. And then in terms of trial sets, not that many to talk about. It's just Olorime, obviously, Infallible Aether. There's Mending, also known as Healing Mage, for some damage reduction if you use an area effect heal ability. You do have to be within 10 meters, but it's still pretty decent if you're progressing content to reduce incoming damage. The only other set I would want to talk about is I have Navitas, which is not great when compared to Worm or Hercines for other people. Mainly used for your own personal cost reduction, because when somebody activates the synergy, you get that cost reduction as well. So at max uptime, you get 6% cost reduction, which is more than what Hercines or Worm would be able to provide, but not by much. So might be worth running this, might not. So it really depends on how well you're able to pump out any synergies. So that's pretty much all this sets here. Now in terms of unique restoration staffs. So there are 4 unique restoration staffs in the game that buff your restoration staff abilities. The Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff buffs Steadfast Ward and its morphs, and it allows it to apply Major Vitality to your target for 3 seconds. The perfect version comes from Vet, non-perfect version comes from Normal. The perfect version has magicka regen, the non-perfect version does not. So pretty useful. Steadfast Ward is sometimes used both in PvE content and in PvP content, and Major Vitality is a pretty strong healing buff to anybody, tanks and DPS. So always a good bonus here, but it is situationally useful. If you're running Sunspire for the Kestis hard mode, for example, or Cloud Rest to help combat Baneful Mark, those are 2 instances where you would use the Black Rose Prison Staff. Next is the Asylum Restoration Staff, where the perfect version comes from completing Veteran Asylum on hard mode, or you can get it from the weekly leaderboards if you're able to place on the weekly leaderboards. Non-perfect version comes from any other configuration of Asylum. So when you cast Blessing of Protection or any of its morphs, Comet Prayer, the cost of your magic and stamina healing abilities are reduced by 30% for perfect, 27% for non-perfect for 3 seconds. Now, with the change to orbs being only 1 orb out at a time, Asylum does pretty much lost its place. You don't really need Agent Sustain anymore from Asylum, so you don't really need to run Asylum anymore. You just pumping out 1 orb a second every 10 seconds. Pretty easy to sustain. Don't really need Asylum to help out your sustain. Next is going to be the Maelstrom Restoration Staff, which is pretty weak as well. This comes from Veteran Maelstrom Arena. So when you critically heal with Regeneration or its morphs, you restore 800 magicka. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. So selfish, sustain, not really all that needed. Again, sustain for healers has pretty easy to do in Scalebreaker, so not very useful at all. Finally, we have the Master's Restoration Staff, which is probably the strongest option here. So initial heal of Grand Healing in any of its morphs, so Lustrous Healing or Healing Springs, restores 740 stamina to you and allies affected. So this is a lot of stamina. It has been buffed since the previous patch. It used to be 258, now it's 740. So with a lot of stamina DPS and some Healing Spring spam, you will be able to return quite a bit of stamina to everybody around you. So very powerful for stamina heavy groups, but other than that, if you're running magicka heavy, then obviously you don't need to run the Master Restoration Staff. Next, going over our character sheet. Aim and Breton. Bretons are going to be one of the stronger races when it comes to healing output. They get 2,000 max magicka, they get 100 magicka regen, and 7% cost reduction to magicka abilities. So really great for sustain. You might not necessarily need it, so if you don't need to run Breton, then you can also run something like a High Elf or a Dark Elf. They both get 258 additional spell damage, which increases your overall healing strength, as well as 2,000 max magicka for High Elves, 1875 max magicka for Dark Elves. You could also go with Argonians, who have a kind of decent sort of middle ground between sustain and healing strength. They get 8% additional healing done, so that's where your healing strength comes from. They get max health and max magicka, 1,000 of each, plus they get 4,000 magicka, health, and stamina back whenever they drink a potion, and that's where the sustain comes in. So if you use a potion of spell power, then you also get additional 4,000 magicka on top of the magicka that you already get from drinking the potion in the first place. So that gives you quite a bit of magicka back, helping out your overall sustain there. Then in terms of attributes, all points are going into magicka here. If you are running, like I am, 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy with your Undaunted passives, you have prismatic enchants on your large pieces. You won't need any points in the health here. You can see we're sitting at 17.4k max health or so, which is more than enough before Evan, before toughness for most trials in the game. You could always shift some points from magicka to health if you want to survivability. It's kind of up to you whether you feel like you need that or not. You could also just replace a small enchant on your armor with a health glyph if you want to go that route. Next, in terms of Mundus, you have a few options. You can go with the Trinimac for magicka regen if you'd like. DKs do have lower sustain overall compared to other classes, so it might be a good idea to pick up the Trinimac. You could also run the Ritual for just raw healing done. You can also go with the Apprentice for the spell damage bonus for more healing. You can also go with the Thief to kind of get some more crit bonuses out there, some crit heals, as well as damage as well if you're going the damage kind of off DPS route here. Challenge with being off DPS as a mag DK, as a DK healer, is the fact that the damage morphs for some of your abilities are not compatible because they're the same morphs that you'd be using for healing. So for example, Cinderstorm and Eruption, one is a DPS, one is a healing morph. Can't use both on the same build, so you kind of have to pick which one you want. You're either going to be giving up some healing to do more DPS or doing some more healing at the expense of DPS, so kind of got to pick which one you want to go for there. For food, we're running Clockwork Citrus Fillet. You can also use Witchmother's Potent Brew. This gives us the max health and max magicka as well as the magicka regen for overall sustain. Very nice balanced out stats here. You could also run Orsguard's Red Frothgar, which is a blue food which gives you 5,000 max health and 459 stamina magicka regen, but you won't get any max magicka from using Orsguard's Red Frothgar, so it's kind of up to you if you want to run that food or not. You can also go just straight up buy stat food, which is just max health, max magicka. Finally, our skill bars. Starting with our front bar, we have Healing Springs. You can go with the other morph if you'd like. Illustrious Healing, Combat Prayer, Energy Orb, Fragmented Shield, Obsidian Shard, Reviving Barrier. For our back bar, this is a Lightning Staff bar. We have Overflowing Altar, Elemental Drain, Blockade of Storm, Cinderstorm, Cauterize, Aggressive Warhorn. You can swap out Overflowing Altar if you'd like, and you can also swap out Obsidian Shard if you'd like as well. So in terms of other skills you want to have on hand, if you're able to be within melee range, or 10 meters is the technical radius of Engulfing Flames, you can also run Engulfing Flames. So this just applies a debuff on the enemy, which allows them to take 10% more damage from flame damage attacks. Really good if you have a lot of magic DPS, but if you're running mostly stamina, not going to be quite as useful. Deep Breath is great if you need an AoE interrupt. Typically speaking, you will not be in charge of that, but it's always nice to have this in your back pocket. And then Earth and Heart, if you want to run Molten Armaments or Igneous, or I should say, if you want to run Igneous Weapon, you can, but most DPS in endgame PvE will be getting Major Sorcery and Major Brutality from potions, so not that useful. Under the Resto staff line, Radiating Regeneration is pretty decent because it applies it to 3 people now, so you can just use this once and you pretty much hit almost everybody in a dungeon 3 times, and you've hit almost everybody in a trial, 4 if you want to get everybody. So pretty useful. The heal over time is also not that bad either here. Then you want to run Healing Ward is the morph that you want to pick for Steadfast Ward here. Pretty nice heal, especially if the target is very wounded. So for example, Cloud Rest to combat Baneful Mark, Laketi's Hard Mode to combat Ice Prisons. It's a very strong heal with Healing Ward, so definitely a decent move to have on hand. It's not really going to be a burst heal so much, but it does provide both a shield and a heal, so really great utility move here. If ever you need a shield, you can always run either Morph of Annulment, Magic or Harness Magicka, and really kind of pick whichever one you prefer. Under the Fighter's Guild line, make sure to have Ring of Preservation on the hand for the minor protection. It could be potentially useful depending on the strategy. There are some strategies where you are going to be stacked together for Execute or for some other mechanic, so getting minor protection might be useful there. The heal is pretty decent, but it's not very powerful because it does scale off of stamina and weapon damage. Mend Wounds, either Morph, Mend Spirit, or Symbiosis, is a very powerful heal. It actually, in terms of raw healing done per second, is actually one of the strongest moves in the game. It is a toggle ability, so it does replace basically your light attacks and heavy attacks with this sort of healing ability. So just keep that in mind. If you do want to do actual damage with your light attacks, you will need to switch this off. Make sure to have all the abilities under the Northern line unlocked, so Overflowing Altar for the Lifesteal and Blood Feast synergy, Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy, Inner Rage for Taunt. There are some strategies where you will need to taunt things as a healer. Bone Search for the Spinal Search synergy, obviously Energy Orbs for the heal and the Healing Combustion synergy. Then on the Alliance War line, make sure to have efficient Purge for those situations where you gotta purge people. Pretty important to do that. So that's pretty much it for all the abilities. Now to our CPs. CP cap is still 810. Nothing has changed for the past few patches, so we still have 270 CPs across each of our different constellation types. Starting with green CPs, the most important node to hit is going to be Arcanist. Get 100 into Arcanist for that 15% additional magicka regen. From there, the other nodes, you can really depend on whatever you'd like. So, for example, Send Fem Tenacity is nice if you find yourself heavy attacking very often for sustain. But if you're not doing that, then drop points out of Tenacity, put them into other nodes. Shadow Ward, Tumbling, and Warlord are generally speaking going to be the most useful nodes there. Finally, our next are blue CPs. Let me just rearrange all of these real fast. So for blue CPs, you're going to want 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn, and then the remaining 70 points can be placed wherever you'd like because the nodes are mainly focused on DPS, so it's kind of up to you where you want to put them. For example, 32 Ally Expert, 10 Spell Erosion, 28 Thaumaturge will hit all the jump points that you need. Finally, our red CPs. This is going to be kind of a balanced approach to things, so you're not really going to maximize your mitigation across a single piece of content, but rather get very good mitigation across all pieces of content. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's pretty much it for all the build stuff. Now let's go ahead and talk about where Dragonknight healers are unique, kind of how they differ from more traditional Templar Warden healers. So one of the big things with DK healers is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, our burst heal is not really reliable. Burst heal is going to be Obsidian Shard. So you can see here it does heal for quite a bit, almost 10,000 healing right off the bat, but it is quasi-random, so it basically heals you or an ally near the enemy. Now, the actual radius of the heal is actually fairly large, but it does pick proximity to the enemy is one potential factor. It does not necessarily heal the lowest health person that you want. So, kind of what I mean when I said Obsidian Shard is going to be a little bit inconsistent when it comes to who it heals. Very good heal, but it's just kind of a little bit of RNG involved as to who's going to get the heal itself. Cauterize is another burst heal, which is not quite as strong. So you can see here only 5,000, about half as strong as Obsidian Shard. And again, it does have a little bit of RNG. This one is more of a smarter heal. It will try to heal somebody who is at the lowest amount of health possible, versus Obsidian Shard, which does take proximity into a little bit of effect here. So just keep that in mind with Cauterize. So that's one of the big weaknesses of Dragonknight tanks. Your burst heals can be a little bit inconsistent at times. There are ways around it, but it's just basically just another layer of difficulty onto playing a Dragonknight healer. The other big one is that you don't have any sort of unique class synergy. So all of your moves don't have any additional synergy attached to them. The only class synergy you're going to be getting is from Standard, which is an ultimate that you're not going to be using. So as a result, you're not providing any sort of additional synergies unless you were running something like Dark Talons, but that doesn't work on bosses, so you wouldn't be able to get a synergy to pop up anyways. So that's one of the big weaknesses of Dragonknight healers. You don't really have any sort of unique synergies. The only synergies you're going to be able to provide are from class agnostic skill lines. So, guild lines, armor lines, etc. So overall, you're going to be able to provide less synergies than a Templar or Warden healer. The only other class that has no class synergies are the Nightblades, but the Nightblades do have synergies with their ultimates, which you will be using as a Nightblade healer at occasion. So that's kind of where Dragonknight healers kind of lie here. Where they do excel, though, is the fact that you have very, very good major mending uptime through Fragmented Shield. So Fragmented Shield will always provide you that major mending for 6 seconds. If you're running Jorvuld, this is buffed by another 40%, so you can get a very good uptime major mending. So your amount of healing that you do is actually fairly strong. So just to give you an idea of how much healing you're able to get with major mending. Energy Orb right now heals for 1064 health without major mending, but as soon as we pump ourselves up with major mending, this bumps it up to 1297. So we get about 200 more healing done with every half second, basically giving us an additional 400 healing done per second. And that does add up between all of your heal over time abilities, and so it's fairly easy to maintain this major mending as well through Fragmented Shield. The shield that you give out with Fragmented Shield is not very strong. It might save a life here and there, just because shields do inherit resistances now, but you're not really running this for the shield, you're running it more for the major mending portion of things. Now, in terms of how healers are actually played in ESO, it's a little bit different in ESO compared to other MMOs in the fact that, yes, part of your role is making sure everybody is healed up, make sure nobody's dying, but another big part of it is managing buffs and debuffs. So some of this is going to be coming from your skills, so things like Energy Orbs, Comet Prayer for Reminder Berserk, as part of it's going to be coming from your sets. Olorime for spell for the Major Courage, minor vulnerabilities coming from Infallible Aether, and so on. So what separates a good healer from a great healer, especially in the eyes of endgame PvE community, is how well you're able to maintain buffs and debuffs. So just want to make sure you're hitting your Comet Prayer out. You make sure you have an orb out at all times, every 10 seconds, to make sure everybody has a chance to pop the orb for a synergy on top of the heal itself. So that's really what you want to focus in on once you get the hang of survivability and mechanics of the fight, kind of recognizing when large damage is incoming so you can anticipate that. So once you get that down, it's just a matter of making sure to maintain your buffs and debuffs as best as you can. Now, I do not play a Dragonknight healer. My Dragonknight main can be played as a healer, but generally speaking, it's going to be a tank for the most part. There may be 1 or 2 streams where I do play Dragonknight healer just for fun in sort of more casual trials environments, but generally speaking, Dragonknight healers are not going to be seen in endgame PvE communities just because Templars and Wardens are, generally speaking, going to be stronger healers. That being said, healing in general, the philosophy behind healing doesn't change depending on class. So you can still check out a couple healer streams, which I have in the description below, like Tabata and Sophie, to get an idea of how healing works and how healing endgame content works on different classes. And you can take those lessons and translate them over to Dragonknight healing. It's going to be a little bit of a shift because obviously the class itself is obviously different, so you will kind of need to learn how to replicate certain things that a Templar can do on a Dragonknight, for example, but it's still possible to learn how to do that. So in the description below, I do have links to those main healers who do stream on occasion. Beyond that, though, that concludes this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments about the build or healing in general, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.